All right, today we're diving into something pretty unsettling from our source material. It's called the Alice in Wonderland Protocol. And yeah, the name sounds kind of whimsical, but trust me, the theory behind it is anything but.
So, let's just jump right in with a question that really gets to the core of this whole thing. What if the best way to hide a truly awful crime wasn't to cover it up, but to make the crime itself so bizarre, so completely unbelievable, that nobody would ever believe the victim? What if the story is the shield?
And right there, according to the source material, that's the absolute core of the Alice in Wonderland technique. It's basically a strategy of psychological warfare. The whole idea is that if you wrap the abuse in these layers of surreal, really theatrical, just absurd details, any testimony that comes out later is automatically poisoned. It's designed from the ground up to sound like a delusion, like a bad dream, not a real memory.
Okay, so this takes us straight into our first section, a weaponized wonderland. And let's be clear, we're not talking about some fairy tale here. We're talking about a meticulously engineered psychological trap, one where fantasy becomes the perfect smokescreen for a really brutal reality.
Yeah, the source material is really specific about this. It doesn't describe this as just random, senseless cruelty. It calls it a brilliant, sociopathic defense mechanism. The alleged goal? To build a system of abuse that has its own built-in get-out-of-jail-free card. So the absurdity? That's not just some weird side effect. It's the whole point. It's what provides that perfect, plausible deniability.
So the big question is, how could a system like this actually work? I mean, how do you even begin to do that to someone? Well, that brings us right to the alleged mechanics of the protocol in our next section, shattering the psyche. Now, the source material doesn't just pull this out of thin air. It connects the Alice in Wonderland protocol directly to something much bigger, with a real historical context, trauma-based mind control, or TBMC. And this whole methodology, it's allegedly rooted in actual declassified CIA programs. You've probably heard of them, like MKUltra and an earlier one, Project Artichoke. These were programs that were literally researching the absolute limits of psychological manipulation.
Okay, so here's the crucial part. How is this trauma supposedly weaponized? The source documents break it down into a two-step process. First, you induce extreme, inescapable trauma. And, the human mind has this kind of survival switch for that level of pain. It dissociates, it fractures. The core self just checks out to survive. And that's step two, exploiting the fracture. The programmers, as the source calls them, allegedly slipped into those gaps in memory and insert new artificial personalities. They call them alters, that can then be programmed and controlled.
So you see, the trauma is what allegedly creates the opening. But it's the surrealism. That's what protects the whole operation. And that's where everything really comes together in our next section, surrealism as a shield.
And this slide just lays out the strategic advantage perfectly. Look at the left side. You've got a standard testimony. I was assaulted in a normal room. What happens? A credible investigation gets started. But then you look at the right, the Wonderland testimony. I was abused in a ritual, there were people in animal masks, the room had optical illusions, and the result? According to the source, it's dismissed. Immediately. The victim gets labeled as psychotic, and the case is dead in the water before it even starts.
There's a quote from the source that just nails this idea. The system uses the sheer, brazen absurdity of its own crimes to gaslight the victim and the public simultaneously. Think about that. It's a psychological war on two fronts. The victim starts to doubt their own sanity, and at the same time, the rest of us, the public, we're basically conditioned to dismiss the story right from the get-go.
But here's where it gets even stranger. The source material claims this isn't just about psychological tricks. It actually moves into the physical world, which brings us to our next section, the architecture of abuse.
And the claim here is pretty wild. This isn't just some abstract theory of abuse. They're saying it's literally an architectural blueprint, that the very design of certain places is part of the weapons system itself, built specifically to ramp up the trauma and disorientation. So what does this kind of architecture even look like? Well, the source points to some really specific environmental tools. We're talking about bizarre theatrical settings designed to just completely shatter your sense of what's normal. Think high-contrast geometric patterns, like those black and white checkerboard floors, which are mentioned as being used to make you feel dizzy, to induce dissociation. Throw in rooms with optical illusions and weird ritualistic settings, and you've got an environment that's literally engineered to make you lose your grip on reality. And to make this less abstract, the source material points to a very specific, very real-world example, Jeffrey Epstein's island, and in particular, that now infamous blue and white striped temple. The argument being made is that this crazy-looking building wasn't just some rich guy's weird taste. No, it was an alleged example of this applied trauma-based architecture, designed to be so strange that if you ever tried to describe what happened there, you'd automatically sound like you were making it all up.
Okay, so all of this, it leads to a really chilling conclusion. It broadens the whole scope from just an individual victim to, well, all of us. Which brings us to our final section, gaslighting the world.
And this really leaves us with a huge question to think about. I mean, if absurdity itself can be used as a weapon to shut down a victim, how does that change how we should look at testimony? When you hear a story that sounds just too crazy to be true, you have to wonder, could that be by design?
And to wrap this up, let's look at a detail from a real, declassified document cited in the source. It's a CIA memo from 1953 about Project Artichoke, which was a precursor to MKUltra, and it outlines the goal of their research. It wasn't just about getting information. The stated goal, their words, was to create a controllable secondary state in a person. So this language, about creating programmable, alternate personalities, it's not from some fringe website. According to the source, it's right there, in the CIA's own files, and that just leaves you wondering, how far did that research actually go?